welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn Podcast. I am your host, Michael Grace. Today I am joined by one of RPI's own. Barbie Hunley is a senior project manager with us, but Barbie has done a whole lot here at RPI. She started very, very young in her career, I'd say, and grew. She was in our HCM practice as a HCM practitioner and then moved over to the PMO and then started doing some practice management activities. So we're going to talk all about that. One of the interesting facts about Barbie that I was able to dig up is before she was 30, believe it or not, we're sharing her age, I guess, through that little fact. But before she was 30, she traveled to all 50 states, which I didn't know and now find totally fascinating. So welcome, Barbie, to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So it's the month and just shortly after the day that we're recording this, where we kind of pay homage to women and the accomplishments of women and leaders. And when I look at folks that have just done good from a career perspective, I'd put you pretty close to the top of that. You've had a lot of success and grown, and a lot of our listeners really wonder, like, okay, how did she get to be a senior project manager? How is she delivering all of this? These cool projects and developed as a person. So feel free to share a little bit about your story, kind of, what'd you do in college? Because the other interesting fact is Barbie's college degree is nowhere near related to project management, which is another fact, but I'll let you tell that story.
Yeah, sure. So thank you. I was actually a sports management major. And even before that, I thought I wanted to go into politics and work in the Italian consulate. So I went into poli-sci, started off in a St. Mary's College across from Notre Dame, quickly realized that wasn't for me, transferred to George Washington University in DC and thought, I'm never going to stop loving sports, so I'm just going to go into sports management. And then quickly realized that, holy moly, that's a grind and you don't make any money. And what it ends up being is a benefit for the people you love, which is great. I got to have really wonderful experiences. I'm from Pittsburgh, got to be on the ice with Sidney Crosby, Mary Lemieux, my family got to meet a lot of people, go to a lot of concerts for free, but it's a grind. So from there, my journey is, I think like a lot of people's, it has not been linear. And as a planner, that drove me nuts for a bit. But I think that's one place where I've kind of learned to let go and kind of give it to God, if you will, and just trust the process. And I was in Cleveland working for the Cleveland Indians, and my parents had moved to Boston, and I just followed them up there, and I landed myself at New Balance, which is really where I think the start of my career was. I started off in customer service. And it's funny, as you were saying, how did you get here? I got here from, I'm pretty relentless. So that's part of it. But honestly, I got here from the people that were willing to just have conversations with me. I was really into volunteering when I lived in Boston, and New Balance was really supportive of that. And through volunteering efforts, I made a lot of friends, and I made a lot of friends in the tech department. And one gentleman who worked in EDI, we just started doing lunch and learns, and he's like, you're in customer service, you're on the phones all day, you don't want to do that. Let me just talk to you about EDI, and let me just tell you a little bit about it. And it's funny, I actually just texted him a few weeks ago thanking him, because I really think he catapulted my career just by that small gesture of like, hey, during lunch, why don't we do a lunch and learn and let me teach you about this thing? And an opportunity opened up on that team for a temporary spot. And I ended up working in EDI for a year and a half. And through that opportunity, I learned, all about, it's helped me, Michael, a lot here at RPI. It's actually what I talked the most about when I interviewed with Keith, was because then I knew some of the technical pieces, and I was actually going in and updating logic for some of the, interfaces, and I knew every single file number by heart. Um, but I had the people side, so I was able to have the people side and deal with the tech side. And having that understanding just elevated the respect that I got within the organization, and with the customers, both internal and external. And from there, I then was promoted, and I was actually managing our business for Kohl's and J.C. Penney, which at the time was, those were the two largest partners with New Balance. So it was huge. And but it's all because of that conversation and all because I said yes. And I said, there were times in that I was like, oh, Steve, this is like horrible. This is so boring. But through that process, I built out Salesforce for them. Like, it was my first opportunity to like get my hands dirty. And I just learned so much just by saying yes, to having that conversation. So I really give Steve a lot of that credit,
Yeah.
because I never would have ever thought of that. I would have been like, ooh, tech, that's scary. But he took the time to really mentor me, and give me that growth opportunity. And then it let me get to where I wanted to go anyways. That management of those groups or those vendors, that's what I wanted to do, but I didn't. I had to kind of prove myself, and I wasn't going to do that on the phones. So I'm really grateful for that. And then, I came to RPI, and kind of convinced Keith that I could do anything if he just gave me the opportunity, because I don't like to fail. And yeah, and so thankfully he took that chance on me, and I did. I started off in, actually, even before the HCM team, I started off in finance, which he quickly realized was not my gig. And he brought me over to the HCM team, and I've been here for 5.5 years, and I started off as a finance BA, moved over to an HCM BA, then an HCM consultant, then a project manager, senior project manager, and now I have 5 direct reports, and it's crazy. You tell anyone that, they're like, holy shit, sorry, I can swear on here, right?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
They're like, you've had 6 positions in 5 years. And, it's one of the wonderful parts about being at a small organization is you can taste all of that. And that opportunity to learn, because you kind of have to. And I've had the same thing here, right? Those mentors, Keith being the first one, sitting in a room with me and whiteboarding, Jackie sitting in a room with me and whiteboarding, and just trying to give me context as to what the heck we do here. And then I think I've been successful because I've paid that forward. I get so much joy out of doing that. The little tool you gave us, the board, that's like
the vibe board. Yep.
Yeah, it's just, there's something so beautiful about being able to be together and just whiteboard ideas and communicate and teach and learn. And I've just really enjoyed that. So that's, I think, a long road of how I've gotten here, but yeah, just very appreciave, and I stand on the shoulders of giants, that's for sure. It's just people that have taken chances on me, and have been willing to let me make mistakes.
I love it. People ask all the time, probably the most common question as a podcast host that you get asked is, hey, you get to talk to all these really cool people that have done really cool things in their life. If you had to say, what's the one thing that kind of runs through them all? What is that one thing that all the successful people have? And I always sum it up with hustle, right? They're always taking the opportunity. They're always looking for like, oh, this person knows knowledge that I don't have. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes and learn from them. I'm going to get a mentor. Right? They're always driven. And it's not like driven towards wealth. It's driven towards personal growth, which, when you look at your story, it's a story of transition, right? You started in a totally unrelated field, transitioned to something else, transitioned again, just kept changing tracks until you kind of hit your stride, and then were rewarded for it and grew. So it is very cool. So here you are as a senior project manager, big fancy title, right? That means Barbie has a lot of work, and gets to do the big, hairy, scary projects. What do you like about being a project manager? What, like, every morning when you get up, you're like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah, so it's funny. I think it's similar to what I did at New Balance. At New Balance, right, it was all supply chain, and all supply chain is a process. And I love the process. As you know, I am a gold blue for real colors, and I love a list, and I love being able to see that accomplishment. And I love the blue side of me absolutely loves helping people. And I think that's the beautiful thing about project management. I literally think I was born to do it. Like, I love managing a list, and I also like being able to see the gaps and fill those and say, hey, and it's one of the reasons I went from an HCM consultant to a project manager, because at my boss, Melissa, God bless her, she kept being like, yeah, but you keep putting your hands in everyone else's thing. Like, you need to focus on this thing. And I'm like, yeah, but they all need help.
That's awesome.
So I love that part of it. I love seeing the process, knowing where you're going, and then just being able to add that incremental value along the way and learning. I think the good PMs are open and willing to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to understand that connectivity, especially in what we do. We do these huge ERP implementations, and what you do in AP is inevitably going to impact procurement. And sometimes those groups aren't always great at talking. So I love being that connector. So
Awesome. I always say PMs are kind of like, when there's chaos and everyone's trying to run from it, the PMs are the ones that are kind of walking into it, right?
yeah,
And there's lots of projects that just don't go as planned, right? You kind of start off and you have this picture perfect plan, and if everything and everyone just happened perfectly, it would go off without a hitch, and there'd never be a problem. But we all know, right, that that's typically not the story that is told about projects. I always call them battles, right? They're long, drawn out battles, and the PMs are kind of the captains, if you will, right? Bringing in their armor when they need it and their air cover. I feel like I'm quoting Bill Getty here, but they're bringing in kind of all these resources to bear and fight the good fight. What's been some challenging clients, without maybe naming them, but just like, can you share, like, what have been some challenges and what's helped you get through it?
yeah. So I'll give a recent one. Most recently, I was on a client, like very recently, like within the past few months, and I think the way I communicated, or the way I communicate, I tend to be very blunt, very transparent, and that works really well for some clients, and for other clients, it's a bit of a like, ooh. Um, and this client, we decided that I just shouldn't be on that client anymore, just because of the culture that they had, and who I was. But for me to be successful, right, I need to be able to adapt. So what I did, I actually set up calls with all of our team, all of our leads, and said, hey, like, how was my approach? Like, how did you, like, if you're willing, I don't want to put you on the spot. It can be an email, but, how can I handle this better? How can I be a better internal, support system? And then did you see anything with the client side, an area of opportunity? And that the thing I took away was listening. And so I actually like ordered some listening books, like how to be a better listener. Um,
Wow.
and that's, I hear it at home too. So I'm like, all right, I'm hearing this in enough places. I think this is valid. And that's not necessarily a success story, right? How did I turn it around? But I think that's a very real story, because they're not all you don't get to turn them all around, right? So for me, it's a matter of, hey, how do I turn this into the best thing that it can be? Which is, I've got to take some lessons learned away from it, right? And how do I be not just a better consultant and PM, but how do I be a better person? And it's hard because some of the internal people were like, no, I think you were totally fine. Like, you're you. And I'm like, yeah, but I need something. Like, something obviously didn't work. That's probably the most recent one.
Cool. And I just want to, however, that happens so many times, right? When you get as old as I am and have been in the game for as long as I have, just a few years, given how young I am, but you see that, right? Where project teams, the PM's just the most notable, right? Because they're the most interactive on a project, right? They're the most directly involved with the client, but oftentimes it can be other project team members, sub work streams, not necessarily fitting with a client team, right? And people look at that and they're like, oh, this is, and it I think people react to it in a very negative way. And I don't know that, I feel it should ever be looked upon like that, especially when the parties come away doing things like you're doing, right? Like, okay, that didn't work. So I need to broaden my toolbox of things that I can bring to bear next time I encounter that type of customer. Um, so you just kind of, I've just seen it over and over and over again. So it's, when you hear about those types of things, I guess the words of wisdom I would have is for the person or the people involved to get back on your horse, right? Like,
For sure.
and especially given the success that you've had cross industry, many, many, many clients, many different subject matters. Um, it's always interesting to see those dynamics. We have another one playing out right now at a very large healthcare customer in the Southwest, where we just might not have a good fit, and that's okay, right? It's people and personalities and styles, and we're not going to get it right all the time. So,
For sure. Michael, I need 30 seconds because my computer's gonna die.
okay,
So I'll be right
yeah,
back. So
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. No, this is good.
Sorry, I tried and then realized I didn't have one. So this is also the
No
life of a
problem.
PM, right? I have lunch to my left, my phone, my thing, everything's dying, but so tried
That's
to
awesome.
delegate out someone to bring me in a charger, but anyways, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Um, so in addition to being this busy PM, right, and having kind of uh, the folks that report to you, right, which is cool. Kind of an opportunity to develop as a people leader and mentor to folks. You also do other cool things like I don't know how the heck you fit any of this stuff in, but you lead our internal masterminds. For those of you listening that don't know what masterminds is, it's just kind of, well, I'll let Barbie explain what masterminds is. But it's something that I don't know if you started it, but you definitely picked up the torch and championed it since we did the first one.
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm a gold, so I'm very organized, and I'm also very blue. So I love spending time with people and creating relationships. So I was very adamant when I started. I was like, we need to have a mentor program. Again, you heard me talk about my journey, right? So I'm like, that's what's been so valuable for me. Um, Even though it wasn't a structured mentor program, right? It was just having a mentor, especially as we at RPI started to bring in younger, I don't want to call them kids, but the younger generation that hadn't interacted with Infor. They didn't know what the heck it was. And that's how I had been successful. And it got shot down so hard. They were like, we don't want a structured mentor program. And they were right. It wouldn't work here. So we just started trying things. So we tried doing like coffee hours, and we tried doing like structured conversations around leadership. And it really evolved. And it was Justin Braun, who's one of the partners, and then Mike Hopkins, who isn't here anymore. It was really the three of us, and all I did was try to like corral them because they are both very creative. And like maybe bring them down to earth a little bit, but this really was like the three of our brainchild. And what stuck is every month we do a different topic, and it's for the people by the people. So we have our PIers talk about subjects that they want to. We've talked about one on creativity. What does it mean to be creative? And art is not just, can I paint? It may also be, can I create a perfect project plan? We've had one on mindfulness. We've had one on work-life balance. We've had one on how do you be efficient but not become a workaholic in the pandemic. So we've had so many different topics, and it's funny. I get credit for it, and I'm honored, but it's really the people. The people are the ones that are delivering these kick-ass presentations, and they deserve the credit. All I did was like create a platform for them to do it, and I hit record. But they're the ones that have this, and it's created just such wonderful and great conversation within the RPI community. And the hope was from that, then that stems some of those very organic relationships where you then start to reach out to, hey, I never really work with Jeff House, but he's so much fun on, on masterminds. I'm going to reach out to him. And that's really the hope, especially with such a remote, this was pre-pandemic, we were remote, and then the pandemic made it like so obvious. So it's just that way for us to get together, once a month.
Awesome. Talk about the folks that report to you, that role that's kind of new for you. What is that like? How do you enjoy it? Right? Because it's different to be kind of able to control yourself and be self-directed and self-learning and such. And now you're responsible for people, right? And their careers and their success and mentoring them and being someone they look up to. What is that responsibility, I guess? How does that make you feel, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. I love, especially my people, I love seeing them grow. And I love, how I always approach my conversations with them is like, what are you enjoying about the job? Like, that's the first question I asked all of them when I took over the responsibility for them. I said, what do you enjoy about this job? And what don't you like about this job? And then I let them know, like, hey, that shit you don't like, that's going to be there. That's absolutely going to be there. But how can we exploit the things you do like? And how can I create more opportunities for you in these things that you like so that you don't mind doing the stuff you don't like as much? And I love, they're also younger. I'm 34. And I know that sounds young, but my boyfriend jokes I was like came out of the womb at the age of 30, and I'm not sure he's wrong. So I love working with like 20 somethings too, just to see how out of touch I am. But to see like they think about things differently and they interact differently, and there's a lot of value there. And that is going to be, the future workforce as well. So I just have also really enjoyed learning from them. But I love teaching, Michael. Like I was telling you, with like the whiteboarding and going in, and I'm like, okay, where's your project? All right, you're about to get into system integration testing. Here are the things you need to look out for. Here are the things you need to prepare for. Here's how you can support your PM. If it were me, this is what I would do.
Everyone manages it a little differently. But I love that. I love having that connection with them, and just helping them prepare. Again, to me, it's a lot like being a PM. PMs are already herding kittens and supporting people and hugging, crying consultants who are overworked. And I just kind of get to do that with a title, which has just been really wonderful.
Awesome. You mentioned kind of one of your traits, right? Is just that transparency. Um, that there's all kinds of tools that we each have and character traits, right? One of mine that I use is humor, and people oftentimes look at me and they go, "Oh, I'm going to use humor," and I'm like, "Yeah, be careful, right?
You're good.
Careful. Works well for me, probably wouldn't work well for you. Might come off totally wrong." Transparency is kind of one of those, and just that directness is another tool that can be super uber effective, but can also, right, be a double-edged sword to an extent. And folks always aspire to that. They want to be transparent, and they want to. What are some tips on how to wield that weapon?
Yeah, so I think the way to not come off, I don't know, aggressively, even though I sometimes will get that, is there has to be an underlying trust. So when you have a foundation of trust, right? So you
I
and I,
love it.
Michael, we've worked together long enough, right? What did you say to me before we started this? You were like, we've been together long enough, damn it. Like you can be transparent with me, right? And that's to me what transparency is built on. It's that foundation of trust. If I trust you, I'm coming from a place, I'm coming from a good place. It may not come off that way with the words I'm saying, but I'm coming from a good place because I want what's best for you. Either you're my friend, our relationship, or the project. And I want to protect you and I want to protect our PI. So I think trust, developing that layer of trust is the number one thing, at least for me, where I've been successful. And then you also you're granted a little bit of grace if you come off a certain way and you have that trust. It's like, I don't think you meant it that way, Barbie. Can you say it in a different way? And that's hard, right? That's really hard. And a lot of people are scared to be transparent because they're scared people might leave. They're scared people might, not want to talk to them anymore. But the way I operate, I'd rather that truth be out there and we be honest about what we're talking about, and then we work from there, than hold these pieces together that all that does is, you just fill this bucket over here that overflows and then that shit still comes out. It just probably doesn't come out in as productive of a way. So I think building that trust is really important. And then something I'm actually working with all of my reports on is finding your voice, right? So find out who you are and find out how you're comfortable communicating. And that transparency for you might look totally different than my transparency. That transparency for you might be, hey, I prefer to put this in an email, or I prefer to have these topics, I reflect on them, and then we talk about them in a constructive way, right? Like it can be whatever works for you. But as a leader, and especially as a project manager, you have to be able to have some form of transparency, because it's going to be what's best for your team, your internal team, but also for the client. So I think just finding that voice is incredibly important. Again, what kind of leader are you? There are soft-spoken leaders, there are stoic leaders, there are ones like me that are, a little in your face. But I think those are probably the two biggest things, is like building that trust and then finding your voice and operating. I think that's another thing I learned, Michael, from my most recent project. When you are operating from a place of comfort, you tend to do things in a much more respectful way, right? Or the way that is true to yourself. And you have to find a way to be comfortable in your environment. And if you aren't, in my opinion, you have to find ways to be comfortable. So you have to have some of those tough conversations, and then it makes it a lot easier to be transparent.
I love it. There's so much wisdom in what you just said. When I first met Barbie years ago, when I first joined about 2 years ago, we were on a West Coast project for a utility, and I was just, it was on the West Coast, so it was in my domain. I wanted to come up to speed, and they're like, "Oh yeah, go out and meet the team, blah blah blah." There's this PM Barbie out there, blah blah blah. Right? I go out, and Barbie basically was like, hi, welcome. I do not have time for you right now. And was like, and I was like, whoa. Um, but watching you operate in that environment, right, which was not an easy environment by any stretch of the imagination, neither from the client side. There was a third party acting as a client PM. There was new tools. If you could throw flaming knives into the mix of that project, they were kind of all there. So it was, but you were focused on the right thing, right? The project team, the delivery, the issues, the success of the client. Um, so it was just interesting to, first I was like, okay, like that was like, wow. And then as I watched, I was like, oh, she's got her shit together, right? And she's driving stuff and moving it. And so it really allowed me to kind of move into that position of trust and be like, I don't have to worry about it. I just need to be a resource for Barbie. If she pulls the cord, I just need to come, to come to the aid, and I don't need to be in the biz and in her way, quite frankly, right? And then I love what you said about finding your voice. So many people um, believe that they're positioned because they might have a title that isn't a senior something or a director or a VP or I'm not the president of the company or whatever. And so they just sit there quietly, um, and they see things and they don't ask questions and they don't challenge things. And I'm not suggesting that you should rally against everything you don't like, but it's okay to speak up and go, hey, why are we doing it this way? Would it work better maybe if we did it that way? I tell my daughter all the time to find her inner roar. Um, right? It's okay to challenge things in a productive sense, right? Like meaning, hey, I'm trying to understand this and I'd like to contribute to it, and maybe add some value. But so many times folks are intimidated perhaps by, just the establishment, right? Or their positions, and they don't contribute. And I just love, I just kind of rambled off of what Barbie said, but I love so much of what you just talked about being that transparent person, because the trust comes from who you are as a person, right? The belief and the knowledge that your intent is to do the right thing, right? For RPI, for your team, for the client, less so for yourself, because most PMs are pretty self-sacrificing through the hours that they work and the fact that their lunch is on their my right, your left, not eaten yet, and so I really appreciate you just kind of sharing all of that and a bit about how to handle that transparency, because it can get you sideways um, pretty quickly, and it becomes kind of hard to bounce back from. So
Well, and I think part of it too, Michael, is humility, right? Just like I said, I know how I can come off at times. I'm self-aware enough for that, but also being willing to meet people where they are. Amanda says that all the time. You have to meet people where they are. And some of that is just going up and having that, being brave enough to have the follow-up conversation and being brave enough to say, hey, I screwed up. Hey, that email I sent or what I said, my assumption was wrong. And you'd be surprised at how far that goes. That because most people, they just brush it under the rug, never talk about it, maybe just don't be in the same room alone with that person again. So with that transparency, you have to do the other side too, which is you have to be willing to receive that feedback. So
I love it. Lots of folks, right? We have a lot of BAs. We do a lot of work with folks just kind of coming out of school, if you will, the youngsters. I use air quotes because I always call them the kids, right? And then I'm like, they probably don't want to be called kids, right? Like, at what point do you not want to be called a kid? I'm sure they're at it. So, we have some fresh grads, let's call them that. So there's lots of folks that are coming out of college trying to find a path and what they want to do. And project management is a great career field, especially if you have the characteristics of organization and such. What are some tips maybe for new PMs or folks that are exploring the PM field? What are some things you'd offer them? Maybe talk a little bit also around the value or lack of value of like PM certifications that are always hyped. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So recommendations, the reason I've been successful where I am is because I learned the product, and I was willing to learn the product. So I think that willingness and openness to learn is incredibly important. And with that is the willingness to help. Again, I tell my PCs all the time, like, hey, if the HCM team is overloaded and they don't have time to do their test scripts and they can't QA them, you QA them for them. You test those scripts for them. The whole point is they should be able to hand these to anyone and you should be able to do them. So you do that. And a lot of times that ends up being billable. So it's a win-win. But just that willingness to learn. And even though I got a self-help book on it, listening is incredibly important, especially, for what we do, we have these subject matter experts on the client side who might have been in payroll for 30 or 40 years. I'm not going to convince them of anything that they don't know, right? So I think listening is important to the experience that they've had, but also listening to some of their issues, and being able to clearly kind of document those and finding action plans for them, right? Because that's a lot of what a PM is we are fixers. And you may not have the tools, but just learning that and being able to document, some of their hardships and where they're having issues, that then leads into building trust, right? Because they're like, wow, Barbie heard that. Not only did she hear that, she came to me with 3 solutions. Mm-hmm. And then giving those options, and all that's going to be learned, right? You're not going to have that right away. But you definitely need to be willing to put the work in and support others, and do the grunt work. We still do grunt work. We're a small company, so we're still doing some of that grunt work, but that's where you learn. That's where in saying yes, like, can you help with this? Yes. Even if you don't know what the fuck you're doing, yes. Right? Someone will help you. You've got YouTube, you've got Google, you'll figure it out. Like, just say yes. And then that creates a lot of those opportunities for you. And, and I think finding that support person or people, is incredibly important. I am only here because of Ruth, because of Amanda, Stephanie, Teresa. I'm only here because I had so many people help me. And so many people I could go to answer questions for me. And when it comes to certifications, I think it's like getting your degree, right? It's something that people can understand. It's funny, I was listening to a podcast actually about gaming, and it was called The Art of Gaming, which I am not a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but it was super, super interesting. And they were talking about, what was I just saying before I talked about gaming? I was so surprised that I started talking about gaming. Talking about people. Oh, they were talking about how we as a society have, when you talk about a grade point average, you talk about a GPA, mm-hmm. and even some of the statistics that are out there, like the gross domestic product, right? GDP. Right. There are all of these intangibles that you can't calculate, right? So it's like, well, why do we put so much weight on a GPA for a student? Like, that doesn't talk about like anything about who the person is, how hardworking they are, nothing. And it's just because as a society, it makes it easier for us to understand, right? It's just easier for someone who's going through 50 resumes to be able to say, all right, this person got a 3.8, this person got a 2.9. It's just like our minds can only handle so much. And that's how I see a PMP or any of the PMI certifications. It's just a way to make it easier for the other people to rationalize hiring you. And because at the end of the day, they don't understand what you do. They don't understand what a PM does. And I see it as that, right? It's like, all right, fine, I'll get this thing so that you think you know what I know, but you have no idea. I think the wonderful thing about where I have been and RPI is you don't need a PMP to be here. You don't need a whatever the like junior level is, but we'll help you. We'll help you get it because we know our clients see value in it. So I think it's one of those like necessary evils if you want that to be your future. And I will say it's been helpful for me in speaking some of the lingo when you're with PMs who have been PMs for 40 years and they start throwing these words out there to test you. It's really nice when you're like, yeah, I know what a stage gate is. And yeah, I know what this is. So that's like my own ego. But yeah, for what it's worth.
I love it. Good advice for folks coming up. Well, it is cool. With a lot of the guests, I often say, just having worked with Barbie allows me to have a different perspective on who she is as a person, and it's really cool to have you on the podcast. You've dropped a lot of knowledge. You've shared your great advice, I think, on trust and transparency. That anyone, regardless of whether you're interested in being a PM or just being successful in life and in your career, those are applicable words of guidance. So thank you for taking the time. Sitting there in the whiskey room, the high noon. I noticed that 2 of the bottles are empty. I don't know if you participated in that or not, but it's very cool to have you on the podcast, and thank you for all you do, all you've done, and what you'll go on to do in the future. It's going to be fun to watch.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me.
Absolutely.